We learned about our digestive system, our immune system, our nervous system, our respiratory system, our cardio system. Well, this endocannabinoid system actually interfaces with all of these systems that we learned in science class. As a matter of fact, there's no system that's not affected by the ECS. It regulates our mood, our appetite, our pain, our perception. Even when we're pregnant, the ECS comes into play. Even when we're trying to conceive, that ECS is coming into play. So there's some evidence to suggest that the levels of hormones during perimenopause may impact our ECS.
Welcome to Hot Flashy, the #1 podcast in women's health on Good Pods. I'm your host, Anne-Marie McQueen, a journalist with 30 years of experience searching for the true truth. We are stepping outside of the echo chamber to figure out what is going on and what is best for us in perimenopause, menopause, midlife, and beyond. Okay, so welcome to the podcast, Dr. Chin, my dream guest. I feel like you're my dream guest because I have had a very, very hard time finding an expert who knows about this stuff. And the closest I've come is an expert who knows a lot about cannabis, but not a lot about women and perimenopause and all that. So I just want to get into what drew you into this kind of medicine.
My own suffering. The way most, I think, physicians become physicians is they're trying to figure out how to heal themselves. And then they go into the specialty that they need the most help in. So for me, I was a chronic pain patient, before I even became a physician. And it really was disheartening because as a teenager, I was diagnosed with an arthritis issue of the spine. There's no cure. And I went through the whole gamut of conventional medicine, physical therapy first as a teenager, then injections and epidurals and medication. And then I did alternative care, acupuncture, herbs, vitamins, massage, rolfing, all the things. And then by the time I got to medical school, I would wear this back brace all the time because the back brace helped me even stand for 15 minutes washing the dishes. It helped me be an intern in the hospital. You're standing, you're seeing patients, you're helping in the OR, you're doing all the scut work, all the stuff. And I would have to wear this back brace all the time. And one of the physicians, pulled me aside and said, "What's going on here? Why are you always leaning against a wall or, trying to sit down and you're always adjusting your spine? Is everything okay?" And I told him I had ankylosing spondylitis. So he knew of it right away. And he goes, "Oh gosh." He's like, "You're just not going to finish school, are you?" And I said, "Oh my God, it took me so long to get into medical school and try to, get my grades in order, my standardized tests in order. And now you're telling me I'm not going to make it." And he said, "Well, how are you going to stand in the OR for 6 hours at a time if we have a long hip replacement surgery? How are you going to deliver babies? How are you going to, and the list went on and on." And this was an HIV and AIDS physician. And this was in San Francisco at the time. And he told me about this alternative medicine that his HIV and AIDS patients use. This was in the early 2000s. So that dates me for you. And he basically said it's cannabis. And for me, growing up in the Bronx, growing up Chinese, I had all the stigmas associated with cannabis, in my family in the Bronx. It made me think about kids that didn't finish school, kids that were hanging out in the bleachers, smoking weed. My mom, always said, drugs, all drugs, you get schizophrenia with all drugs, don't touch drugs, right? Very traditional Chinese mom. And so here I was in med school and this doctor, my mentor, said, "Hey, try cannabis." And I was mortified. I was mortified because I was at this crossroads in my career. And I thought, okay, I'm wearing this back brace. It's chafing my ribs so much that I'm bleeding through the back brace. So I can either try marijuana that this mentor is offering me, or I can continue trying injections and epidurals and all the stuff that I was trying that wasn't working. So I decided to try the cannabis and I said, "Oh my God, this works." Like, what the hell is in this thing? And that was it. That was it. I dedicated my entire career to figuring out why it works. It didn't cure me, but it managed to stop the progression of my disease. So why the hell does this work?
Yeah.
Why am I a med student finding out about this? And we didn't get taught this in med school. Why aren't we rounding on patients about this? Why aren't there studies? And two decades later, I teach it at NYU here in New York City. I teach it at Syracuse University in New York. I do public health research, and I'm the vice chair of the New York State Cannabis Advisory Board for the governor's office. So, a lot has changed since I tried my first tincture as a med student, but the science is there and it's compelling. It's compelling. And that's how I got into it. It's been a long journey.
That's an amazing story. I'm glad you came across him, because who knows how long it might have taken you. What a choice.
No, and I'm a woman. So I, of course, gravitate towards women's health. How can we better arm ourselves? How do we become more empowered as women when we talk to health practitioners? And why are we more sensitive to cannabis? That was the biggest thing. When I take cannabis, I only need a little bit. And I couldn't figure out why that was. And my patients said the same thing.
So let's just walk us through this system we already have in our bodies, because I think a lot of people don't know that we have an endocannabinoid system. And I think I've seen, since I've been doing hot flashing, 3 studies on cannabis use and menopause that were published by the North American Menopause Society, but they're always about use and what people are using them for. And there's always big cautions, right? There's not a lot of research and there's not a lot that we know about this. But also then I've read that we used these drugs way a long time ago. Like it was in the Merck manual in the 1800s. So there's this confusion, and I don't know, we can talk later about the mood and the maybe propaganda about it. But first of all, let's just go back to the fact that our body has an endocannabinoid system. And can you just sort of walk us through what that means?
So the endocannabinoid system is also called the ECS. It's a complex network, neurotransmitters, receptors, and they regulate the functions in our body. So you and I learned about in science class, right? In 5th grade, we learned about our digestive system, our immune system, our nervous system, our respiratory system, our cardio system. Well, this endocannabinoid system actually interfaces with all of these systems that we learned in science class. As a matter of fact, there's no system that's not affected by the ECS. It regulates our mood, our appetite, our pain, our perception. Even when we're pregnant, the ECS comes into play. Even when we're trying to conceive, that ECS is coming into play. So there's some evidence to suggest that the levels of hormones during perimenopause may impact our ECS. So changes in estrogen, for example, might affect our own ECS. And that is why it's so significant. I didn't learn about the ECS in medical school. There's more and more research now, but they're realizing, wow, this ECS system is so important. This endocannabinoid system is so important.
Does it work in the same way that the hormone system, and this is so grossly simplified, but that there's receptors and that there's our own internal, do we have our own internal cannabis kind of thing?
We have naturally occurring molecules that are cannabinoid-like.
Okay.
But it's like a network. If you think of a galaxy and you think of all these just networks happening, it all functions as a network. If there's a unity to it. It's quite harmonizing and balancing. So, I guess in a more simplified way, it's like an orchestra. So you have this endocannabinoid system is like the head of the orchestra. And then you have this immune system, lymphatic system, you have your respiratory system. And they're all trying to be in homeostasis and balance each other out. And then that ECS is turning the volume up when it needs, it's bringing the volume down when it needs. So it's almost like a dance, if you will.
So it seems that our knowledge of this has been kind of erased. Like it seems a bit suspect, or because we did know it existed. Do you have any theories about why we don't learn about it?
I don't know if it was erased, but it just was understudied.
Yeah. Okay. How much do we know about it now, would you say?
Oh my goodness. There's thousands and thousands of journal articles published on it. You just have to really dig for it. But the layperson, is not going to read these research articles. So it's really up to educators, science educators, health practitioners to educate the public. I mean, that's why I teach at the university level. I teach undergraduate level and I teach professional level so that we can distill this complex information so that the public can understand it and support research.
And so just using your situation before we get into perimenopause, how did using cannabis actually work to improve your pain?
I think the biggest thing is the inflammation and pain connection. So I have used a lot of anti-pain medicine, right? We use anti-pain medicine all the time, but once it wears out, then what? Then you're back to where you started. So my whole thing was I needed to really diversify the sources in which I was turning to alleviate my pain. And cannabinoid therapy was just one piece of the puzzle. But of course, I have to still make sure that I move. I have to make sure I sleep well. I still have to make sure that I eat well, right? So there's these different levers that I have to pull. And cannabis really helped with both in the pain and in the inflammation level.
Okay, so what do you think is going on in perimenopause with pain? I was talking to a doctor this week, and I was saying that my own mom had fibromyalgia, and it was after she had a surgical menopause. And I can't ask her now, but I often think, did she have fibromyalgia or did she just have a lot of physical pain in menopause? Do you know what I mean? And the doctor said, oh, some people are thinking that fibromyalgia is just perimenopause pain. But that's a big, long, complicated way to ask the question of what do you think is going on with the pain that we experience in perimenopause? I had profound physical pain for years in my 40s. It's passed, but it was like sometimes it was hard to roll over in bed. My hips would hurt so much.
So when did this pain start for you? Did it start when, like at 40?
No, I remember it mostly in my mid 40s. I remember just thinking, God, I'm always in pain. And I remember working out and then just never not being in pain. You know what I mean? Like it just never sort of went away. And then I went on the Whole30 diet at some point just because I heard that it could help with pain, and it did. It helped with pain tremendously. Like removing a lot of things from my diet really helped. But I know most of the women complain about aches and pains and muscle pain and what feels like bone pain. And I'm just wondering what you think is going on there.
Yeah, well, the changes in hormone levels, right? So the changes in hormone levels can bring about joint pain, maybe more headaches, breast tenderness, muscle aches, or there could be an old injury. Let's say you ran track as a teenager or in college and you had an ankle injury and then it didn't bother you since. You're resilient, you got back on your feet and you were fine. And then when biological women start to transition into perimenopause and their hormones fluctuate, those old injuries might come back with a vengeance. They might notice that. That's why I asked you if there was something that was precipitated the pain, or they might notice the same thing. I'm waking up and I feel like I was hit by a truck. I feel so achy, or I have to add this whole sort of morning stretch to my routine. I mean, believe me, that I have a thing for the morning. I got my foam roller. I have to take a hot shower. I got some heat. So it takes me 30 minutes to prep just so that I can lubricate my hips before I get out of bed. And a lot of women say that. A lot of women say that when their hormones start changing, that inflammation is really turned up in volume.
I did think I used to be a figure skater, so I fell about 9,000 times. And I did think, I don't know. I just feel like this is coming back to haunt me.
So your caliber of athleticism is way beyond.
Yeah. It's fine now though. It's past. I don't have that physical pain anymore. So that's hopeful for anyone who's listening. It does pass. It's just took a while. Okay. I think actually we should talk about the different forms of cannabis and the difference in CBD first. And then we can get into the perimenopause and how you use it.
Good idea. That way we can level set.
Yeah.
So CBD can come from, I will say, the marijuana plant and the hemp plant, just for simplicity's sake. So the marijuana plant has CBD and THC. CBD is the portion of the plant that is anti-inflammatory, anti-anxiety, can help with seizures, but it doesn't give you that euphoria. It doesn't give you that sedation that THC does. And THC is the compound that makes you feel sort of light and wavy, giggly, gives you that high. helps you sleep, right? So those are the two main compounds that are researched now. And CBD found in the marijuana plant will usually come with THC. But if you get CBD from the hemp plant, you'll notice that the THC is less than 0.3%. Now, in terms of the most popular CBD types, so let's focus on CBD types. There's full spectrum, broad spectrum, and there's isolate. Full spectrum contains CBD and all the other compounds of the plant, terpenes, which gives the cannabis plant that aroma, flavonoids, and it contains less than 0.3% THC. Broad spectrum contains the cannabinoids, the flavonoids, the terpenes, all the beneficial parts of the plant, but zero THC, zero, completely pulled out of it. And then isolate is only the CBD molecule, only the CBD compound, nothing else. So no other essential oils of the plant or flavonoids, terpenes, no other compounds that make up the plant, just CBD. And those are the three popular types that you'll find in the compounds, in the formulations that you see in the stores.
So when it comes to perimenopause and the different symptoms that women experience, how and where can this be used?
So I would say the number one thing is if you think you are experiencing perimenopause, you want to make sure that you talk to your health provider about it. You want to make sure that some of the symptoms that you might have. So, for example, sleep disruption is probably the number one thing that my patients complain. They're like, all of a sudden, I am wide awake at 2 a.m., at 3 a.m., at 4 a.m. Then I've never had a sleep issue before. Number two, it could be libido. So I just feel like I don't want to be intimate. I have changes in my vaginal flora, in my skin, my pelvic area feels drier. I just don't feel the same. So libido, inflammation and pain, and then anxiety, sort of like a nervousness. It just feels like I drank too much caffeine. I just feel like I'm buzzing and just not grounded. Digestion's another thing. Sometimes women will complain about bloatedness, or I feel like I just have to wear my stretchy pants all the time, my sweatpants. I just things don't fit. It don't look the same when I wear clothing. Digestion feels off. My bowels feel off. So make sure when you go to your doctor, you explain the symptoms and rule out anything that might be causing, maybe a thyroid issue, right? Let's look at your blood work. Let's make sure if we need to do any imaging, right? Making sure that nothing serious is going on. And then once we've done that and we say, okay, it's perimenopause. And then let's try to get to the heart of the issue. So then depending on what you're dealing with, if it's libido or sleep or inflammation, digestion, I help patients holistically develop a plan that includes cannabinoid therapy to help you mitigate and get to the root of that problem. So if it's sleep, we look at sleep hygiene. We look at what time you're drinking your last cup of coffee. We look at your diet and lifestyle. And then I look at different cannabinoid formulations that you might ingest or other supplements that you might ingest, because it's not just CBD, but there are other wonderful natural supplements out there that might help you for sleep. Or if it's digestion, I'll make sure that I look at different things that might help your digestion. I'll have you keep a food journal for 3 days. And then I'd sit down and I take a look at that with you.
And you're working with NNABI, and they have a solution that includes CBD. So what's the benefit of CBD in particular over say something with THC? I'm just thinking you could take it at work. That's just seems the practical thing off the top is, you're not going to be stoned, I guess. Is that the main benefit?
The main benefit is that, yeah, you can be active, you can work, you can exercise, you can drive a car. Although I've been using cannabinoid therapy for decades, I am very sensitive to THC. Any more than, I would say, a milligram, I would feel very knocked out and groggy. So I use a CBD dominant formulation for my ankylosing spondylitis, for my arthritis and my perimenopause symptoms. So women in general are much more sensitive to THC. So that's number one. So a lot of women just feel like they'll say, when I do take THC, my partner, my friend who's biologically male, they can take so much more than me. And I feel like if I take too much, I feel panicked. If I take too little, it doesn't work. So CBD is actually a very safe and effective way for you to mitigate the symptoms of perimenopause and not worry about feeling altered in any way. not worried about losing control.
And is it as effective? Like, is THC more effective for some things? Is it more effective for some kinds of pain? What would be the benefits of using THC?
It's individualized,
Okay.
actually. What I usually do is try a CBD dominant formula first
Okay.
to see if that works. And if it doesn't work, then we could add CBD. Let's say it's for insomnia. That would be the main thing, insomnia or extreme pain. So you talked about fibromyalgia. THC for women with fibromyalgia can actually exacerbate that tingling neuropathy feeling that you get with fibromyalgia. So there are certain ailments if you have concurrently with perimenopause. So that's why I do a full workup and I look at the patient holistically. If you have fibromyalgia and perimenopause, or if you have certain type of like rheumatoid arthritis and or diabetes and perimenopause, right? So I look at those things. Sometimes that THC can make those symptoms work. If you have tinnitus, THC can make that tinnitus, that ringing in your ears, worse. And a lot of my fibro patients have tinnitus at the same time.
Okay.
So those are the nuances. That's why I try and stick with the CBD first.
So this podcast is around the world, and we have many different jurisdictions and many different availabilities. Some women can't go to a doctor and say, I'd like to try this, but they do maybe have access to various forms. Is it something that you should try on your own? Do you feel? Is there a way to do that safely?
CBD, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a way to do it safely. The wonderful thing is you are global and there's access to global practitioners. So you can find a few reputable global practitioners, and there's podcasts, there's interviews, there's open lectures that you can start doing the research yourself. Yeah. That's the great thing about us all being connected.
And how about THC? The surveys I've seen that have been published in the Menopause Journal, women are using THC. What are your comments about that and your cautions for that?
To make sure that you purchase the THC product from a regulated dispensary, right? So that you're purchasing it through legal channels, because you just don't know what's in the formula you're taking if you get it from a friend of a friend of a friend. Yeah. If something is in it that won't make you feel good, if it says only 1 milligram of THC and you think it's only 1 milligram, but it's 30, how do you think that's going to make you feel? You're going to feel clammy. You're going to feel sweaty. You might vomit. The room might spin. I mean, you might have a really bad experience if the dosage is too high and you can't take it.
Yeah. And I did speak to these two women who started a company called Hello Again. They have THC and CBD suppositories in California. And they started it because they just felt weird going in the dispensary and they didn't know what doctors to go to. But what about that suppository situation? Because they say that it's helping vaginal symptoms too. And I spoke to someone yesterday who had CBD in their lubrication line. So how are we helping down there?
Well, let's think of those as a topical, right? Yeah. So when you're using CBD lubrication, which I love, because people don't talk about post intercourse care, especially if you're perimenopause and menopause. After intercourse or intimacy, let's say you have vaginal dryness, but you'll also have vaginal inflammation, right? From the friction, it might get even itchier. It might get even drier post intimacy. So you might need a CBD lubrication that not only helps you with intimacy, but helps you with post care. They'll take down the inflammation in your pelvic region. Then when you're thinking of suppositories and when you're inserting the suppositories, it's really like a topical that's helping that mucosa.
I have never had I've never heard anyone mention post care. You're the first person over 100 people. What post care? What do you mean? Like you're saying with CBD is a great way, but what else should you be doing?
Well, it's interesting that I guess we just don't talk about it.
No,
we just don't talk about it.
All I know about that is you're supposed to go to the bathroom. That's all any woman ever knows.
Oh my gosh. I have so many patients that will say to me like, well, I'd love to have sex, but a week or two after sex, it just itches and hurts down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that's the post care. Okay. That's when you could use a CBD lubricant because it takes down inflammation and pain after intimacy.
Which you may not notice for a couple of days because you've just had sex and maybe you're in a mood and things are good. But yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you've created medical protocols and you're working with jurisdictions around the world on this. Where is it at? Like where I know I'm in part of the world where we can only have CBD topically in the UAE and in the Middle East. What's going on in other parts of the world that you're talking to?
So I get hired as an advisor or a consultant. And it really is, we're looking at this really from a public health perspective, right? So every jurisdiction is different. And what I do is I work within the confines of medical clinics, within the confines of universities or hospitals to help health practitioners gather the data that they need to help patients. So for example, I just finished a pilot study where we helped physicians embed into the electronic medical record why patients might be using cannabis medicine, CBD or THC, what products are they using, what is the ailment. So by collecting all this data, I would love to see, a couple of years from now, or I mean, we could even collect the data 6 months from now, but longitudinally, I'd love to see if it affects ER visits, if it affects prescription medication. Does it decrease, we know it decreases opiate use, but what if it decreases anti-anxiety medication, antipsychotic prescriptions, right? What does it do to patients with ADHD? So I'm really looking at collecting all this data from a public health perspective so we can really see what's going on a deeper level and see if we can talk to third-party payers so that patients can get reimbursed for all of this.
And are there parts of the world that are exploring this that you're surprised at?
No, I think, no, because I think that right now, I mean, everyone has good intentions. They just want their community to be safe. And
Okay.
that's really what they want. They want the data.
Yeah.
So a lot of countries will say, we won't really move on legislation or regulation until we have more data. So I'm helping them collect data and asking the right questions. And then there's medical, linguistic, and cultural competence, right? Every jurisdiction has different, like we just talked about different cultures. Offline, we talk about, legalities. So we have to take that into account with the community as well. Educating doctors in certain parts of Asia is going to be very different than educating health practitioners in South America, for instance. Right?
Yeah. How does using cannabis and CBD intersect with hormone therapy?
I usually work with the gynecologist. So I'll work with the gynecologist or the psychiatrist or psychologist, and we create a team approach. So hormone therapy may or may not be used. I put that to the GYN and make sure that they're testing the blood and making sure that the hormone levels are what they need to be. And if not, they can dial it in. And then I'll use cannabinoid therapy to help dial in some of the symptoms. And then sometimes they'll have a psychiatrist on top of that if they've been on antidepressant medications for a while, if they've been on ADHD medications for a while, maybe that needs to be brought down. Usually it's brought down or maybe adjusted to a different pharmaceutical company. So it's almost like I talked to you about that orchestra earlier. That's how medicine should be. We should all be doing this together. So we're dialing it in and customizing personalized care for each patient.
Yeah. Like that show Private Practice that I used to watch. I always used to dream of going to a doctor like that. You remember that practice where they all met and taught? I'd be like, oh, that would be so amazing.
And they're so good looking, right?
Oh, yeah. That wouldn't hurt either. If they were all that good looking and we could go and it was covered by insurance, it would be in dream world. Okay. So with antidepressants and ADHD, do you think there's a role for CBD with depression and with ADHD? Because we're having a lot of adult ADHD diagnoses. Does that help with concentration? And does it help with that low mood?
That's interesting you said we'll talk about ADHD first.
Yeah. I'm joining two together. They're not the same.
So during the pandemic, received so many phone calls from parents of college age and teenagers saying, my young adult is using a lot of cannabis. I didn't realize that because, here she's in college, or I didn't realize it because they were in school all the time, but they are using a lot of cannabis. And they're saying that it helps them for concentration. And there are studies actually that show that CBD helps with concentration. There's a study in Germany about ADHD medication, adults, and CBD. So CBD can help with ADHD. What I do is if the patient's already on a medication like Ritalin or Vyvanse, I make sure that I work with a practitioner and incorporate CBD and just measure, making sure, how effective it is and in what times of the day, because ADHD can get worse in different times of the day. And then I make sure that I keep track of sleep habits. And certain foods can make ADHD worse, especially for young adults, teenagers. So that's one thing. With antidepressants, we know that CBD can help lift mood and can improve sleep. And that is always, works in conjunction with an antidepressant, with mood, right? With fatigue.
Yeah.
So I make sure, so you're starting to see the pattern. It's like sleep, energy, food, right? So we always are looking at these pillars when we are adding CBD to a patient's regimen.
What's your dream research in this area that you would like to see done?
I actually would love to see research on messaging and public health. So as all of these states here, I'm in the US, I'm based in New York, as we see different messaging from these dispensaries, from government, from media, right? How is that affecting public perception and basically consumption habits for patients and consumers? Because we have adult use, right? So we have recreational use, which is therapeutic use. Then we have this medical use. And then we have this overarching messaging through social media and through government. How are those messaging affecting public use? That's what I would love to dig into that I don't really see much people researching at all.
Are there side effects we need to be concerned of?
CBD can interact with certain prescription medications.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that you're careful if you're on any blood thinners. Certainly, if you're on seizure medication, you want to make sure that you're aware of that. And then I would say that it depends on the CBD formulation. So CBD in a tincture, for example, in a certain tincture can cause stomach upset, but you might be sensitive to the carrier oil that the CBD is in, not the actual CBD. So you got to experiment with different brands.
Do you have any thoughts on some of the other plant-based medicines that are emerging? I just bought an ebook about microdosing. There's a company in Toronto that's using some old psychedelic from the 70s that they're sort of reworking. I haven't heard it from them in a while, but do you have any knowledge about any of these other medicines?
I'm following it very, very closely. I'm following the phase 3 trials of MDMA, ketamine, both IV and oral. I'm looking at psilocybin. I think that the psychedelic realm, psychedelic medicines are following a different path than cannabis. They're going through the FDA path. When I look at NYU, for example, Johns Hopkins, studying psychedelic medicine and how it's helping patients, cancer centers are using it for palliative care and end of life. So it's a very different path than what I've seen with medicinal and adult use cannabis. And I think it's very interesting.
What about ketamine? Because there's a doctor in the UK who I see her making videos and she said, women are being prescribed ketamine when they should be having hormone therapy. And I always think, hey,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. She's saying it in a way like this is a tragedy, like someone's given a woman ketamine instead of hormone therapy. But she's a very proper doctor. So I think to her hearing ketamine is like, no. And it's one of those things you hear. It's like, oh no, actually people are using ketamine's being studied in a scientific way for its properties. So I just wondered what you thought the possibilities might be for that.
Well, I'd love to learn about that a little bit more. I know ketamine has shown potential for resistant depression. Mm-hmm. There is an FDA-approved treatment for ketamine. It's called Spravato or esketamine. So it's a nasal spray. I know a lot of centers are using off-label IV ketamine with a lot of success. But I really think the main take home message is working with a long-term trusted clinician, a psychiatrist or a therapist at the same time that you're using ketamine therapy. So you want to make sure that there's a board certified psychiatrist on staff. It's great if they could be affiliated with a major university or hospital so that you're being supported in every way possible. So that would be my take home message with ketamine.
I think I'm hearing a lot, sort of a thread from you is like, we're vulnerable emotionally during this time. So we need to be really careful who we trust our minds to.
Yes. And that's why I want to study messaging, because what I've realized is, information is boundless. There's a lot of misinformation out there. We can look at something and we read 2 statements on a TikTok and we think, oh, this is going to be great for me. And it might not be. So that's why I really would love to see if there was a big study on messaging and consumer use of cannabis or even psychedelics and see how that's affecting us in a public health level. But for us, I think we are our own advocates, right? So for me, I went to great trusted physicians throughout, teenage and as a young adult, and no one could give me answers. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, yes, you want to be careful and be an advocate, but at the same time, it gets tiring when you tell your doctor, I've tried everything and it doesn't work. And when women get dismissed by health practitioners, which we often do, and women are over-medicated, over-prescribed, right? So finding a good support system, finding podcasts like yourself, like spreading great, transparent, empathetic information is key.
You've got experience with something that I talk about a lot, which is taking personal responsibility for your own health, which a lot of us didn't do, right? We didn't grow up that way. It's like, trust the doctor, what they tell us. And it's been a real reclamation for me, like to keep it all. Yeah. So can you just talk a little bit about the importance of that in midlife? You've experienced this for years, but why and how is it important?
I think that health practitioners, and especially doctors in particular, you have this white coat syndrome. You go in and sometimes you're just frozen. You forget all the questions you want to ask. And then you leave and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to ask about this and that. Because there's so many health practitioners now, because information is so widely available, we are empowered as patients. If you don't like your practitioner, you can find another one. There's so many practitioners, and you can find one out of your locale. With telemedicine, there's a way to do telemedicine, maybe with a great practitioner that's 3 hours from you. Mm-hmm. Maybe you do your blood work with your family doctor, with your local family doctor, and then you send that blood work to a practitioner, to a special women's health practitioner that's 3 hours away, and she can look at that lab work and then give you her opinion. Get second opinions, third opinions, right? You owe it to yourself to make sure that you weigh all the pros and cons before making a decision on your health. And then the most important thing is to follow your intuition. Mm-hmm. If you walk in and that practitioner just doesn't make you feel good, there's just something, that's it, you're done. You don't need to justify it. You are done with that practitioner and you will find another practitioner.
And take the time, because it's so disheartening to go back. I know that feeling where it's like, well, I'll just go back to them and this one more time. And yeah.
It's covered under my plan.
Yeah. Oh, can you talk about NNABI's product a little bit?
Sure. So NNABI is a great product. EJ and Marina are the founders. I think the biggest thing was no one was addressing perimenopausal women and CBD and natural supplementation. Also, no one was addressing perimenopause through a lifestyle lens, looking at it from a holistic lens where you look at sleep, you look at lifestyle, anxiety and nervousness, you look at movement, what's going on with exercise, and then digestion, and creating a compound that pulls on those different levers for you. And I think that is the best way that I could describe how the brainchild of NNABI came about.
So it's specialized in that area. You're not just sort of grabbing any old product.
Yes. And I think the biggest thing to take home is when you look at women entrepreneurs, even myself as a physician, why do you go into something why do you have a passion? Why do you want to find the answers? Or Anne Marie, I've been listening to your podcast. It's because we are our own best advocates. And once we find something that works, we really want to spread it with our girlfriends, right? We want to tell our family all about it. And when I look at companies like NNABI, when I look at education platforms such as yourself, I think this is why we are here on this earth. This is the legacy that we want to leave, because we want to help the next generation. We don't want them to go through what we had to go through.
Exactly. If I had to have an epic perimenopause, a terrible, horrible, no good perimenopause, then something good has come out of it. Oh, that's just great. What's your parting wise words for women going through perimenopause, having worked with many of them?
Intuition. No one knows your body like you do. That's it. You can go to this expert practitioner. You can find, the top researcher, double PhD in the world, but you still know your body the best. And if you're taking something that just doesn't serve you, and really that's your answer to your practitioner, like, it just doesn't feel good when I take it, that's good enough.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chin. It's just a dream to talk to you. And I'm looking forward to what you do with research moving forward, because 5-10 years from now, we're going to be in a really exciting place, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
You too.
Hot Flash Inc. was created and is hosted by Anne-Marie McQueen, produced and edited by Sonia Mack. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the products. Information received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem, i.e. menopause or anything else, or any healthcare questions, please promptly see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Anne-Marie McQueen and any producers or editors, disclaim any responsibility from any possible adverse effects from the use of any information contained herein. Opinions of guests on this podcast are their own, and the podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about a guest's qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is owned by Hot Flash Inc. Media.